Hello guys, welcome back to Rajasmeka. It's Marco here, and today we speed paint vampires with the fastest and most efficient process you have ever seen. This is the third episode of the speed painting series dedicated to Cursed City, and if you are new to the channel, I strongly suggest you to start from the skeletons. I painted all these miniatures in a couple of days, working them as part of an ideal army, and the mood of the models, the color I chose, and the techniques I'm going to use are all connected to the big picture, and dependent or in contrast with my previous choices. So consider the three videos as a single one. As always, don't worry if you don't have these precise models, because I put the accent on the techniques and the reasons behind every little choice, so you'll be able to transfer and adapt these ideas to any other model or army. Until this point, I loosely followed the original color scheme, but I find the one used for the humanoid vampires a bit too bland and subdued. So I played with the theme, tinkering with the relative quantities of its tones and their saturation, to give the idea of something different, more powerful and quote-unquote alive, still keeping the general aesthetic tight and coherent. In the lore, they are well-fed vampires of a feral bloodline, chosen from the nobility of the city. So I don't want for them the rough, cadaverous look of zombies and skeletons, but the one of sleek apex predators, fueled by the magical power of blood. For skeletons and zombies, the foundation of the color scheme is in these cold tones, with an accent of warm red that ties them to the bloody heraldry of the enemies. So, to show the jump in the hierarchy, I literally switch these proportions. The colors are the same, so I don't have to worry about their harmony when they are all together on the table, but you can easily tell that they are something different. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button to always know what happens on the channel. And if you want to support my work, like, comment, share, watch another video, and maybe check my Patreon page, where you can find the real-time footage of my videos, with every single little line and brushstroke. Thanks a million, guys! Let's start immediately with a game-changing trick. These are the colors I'm going to use to prime the models. We tend to consider priming like a stage independent from painting, something we do only to seal the plastic and create a better textural surface for the next layers. But as any canvas painter can tell you, the primer can do much more than that. Working on the zombies, you saw me priming in blue to introduce from the beginning a strong cold note, able to influence all the following tones. But if you need more than a single chromatic sensation, you can simply use more colors from the beginning. I want the core of the bodies to be pale, but with a strong, warm red note, as if they have just ingested a ton of blood. But moving away from the center, I want the skin to become stretched, inflamed, and then livid and dead, or completely mutated into a natural animal pose. In terms of materials, you have several options to tackle priming in this way. You can use proper colored primers. Vallejo, for example, has an entire line of cheap chromatic surface primers. Or, like in my case, simply use paints that you know have a good grab and general resistance. Or you can even use standard acrylics, maybe boosting their toughness with a light coat of varnish on top. Working on few models, this approach has a tiny impact on the working time, but if you are painting an army, it can save you a couple of days of boring work. Army painting is not necessarily speed painting, but even if you are not in a hurry, this helps projecting you immediately into the fun part of the painting process, keeping awake your interest and inspiration. As you can see, I don't really care about transitions, and even if I'm using the airbrush for speed, you can clearly see a strong line where two colors meet. This is just a quick color blocking to set the loose proportions of the various colors on the model, but the fluidity of the shade is something that will be created by the following layers. As direct consequence of the multiple tones of the priming step, I'm going to use multiple tones for my zenithal light. I use a simple gray for the bases and their architectural elements. I want the focus to stay on the models, so I set from the beginning a low saturation on these parts, painting a foundation softly modulated by the different values of the volumes, but with a flat grey that will tone down the vibrancy of anything on top. I don't touch the blue at the very end of hands and feet, because I want it dark and livid, and it naturally blends into the cold violet without extra work. But I use a light magenta to highlight these upper warmer parts. I chose this strong chromatic and value jump to set a good contrast with the first layer, and to facilitate its blending with the major skin tone of the core. This is the layer that changes everything, and the step that in few seconds brings the model from the primer to, I would say, 80% finished. I came up with this idea trying to make more interesting a bunch of little Skaven. Usually I like to add the underlying colors on top of the basic skin tone to make them more powerful, but sometimes because of the small size, low definition of the sculpt, or a complicated pose, it's difficult to follow this path. The humanoid vampires are little, with small and smooth muscles, and in dynamic, complicated poses. So, like on the Skaven troopers, a linear layering is an easier and more efficient option. Even if the color from the bottle is a classic, quite basic skin tone, the extreme value and tonal jump between the two layers helps creating the sense of something alien and unnatural, full of interesting tones in every little volume. It's also a light, neutral base for the oils, that need a receptive canvas for their load of extra colors and sensations. At this stage they lack definition, but the load of chromatic information you can get with two simple steps is something crazy. You can see how the Varskir in particular is already quite close to the box art. I close this stage with just a tiny bit of white. Its main contribute is on the strong highlight of the flowing hair, to give the idea of the shine, like on non-metallic metal. But I extend the spray also to the upper parts of the muscles, to set the maximum amount of contrast possible on the pale skins. I quickly paint the fur using on this modulated undertone some of the tones I used to paint wood on zombies and skeletons. This greenish brown is a secondary supporting tone, but still integral part of the army scheme, so I must find a way to add it to these models. It doesn't matter that this is a totally different material. Later I'll set better that difference with blends and textures, but I need to use it for the sake of uniformity. The overgrown pubic hair / furry pants are perfect for the role. Plus, the green sensation coming from Militarum Green is great to create contrast next to the red and violet tones of the skins. Following the box art, I use Basilicanum Grey to add a darker tone to the upper parts of the masses of fur on the Varskir, trying to use multiple delicate brushstrokes to create extra lines and the illusion of extra movement inside the single strands. Another major detail is the red tone of the hair, so I invest a couple of extra steps to make it more striking. I apply a base of flesh tire red on top of the modulated underpainting to obtain a deep, solid tone with a bit of internal movement. Red is all about luminosity, so I come back with white ink to boost the lighter tone I'll put on top of the deeper red. You know that I usually don't mask my models before spraying, but here the stakes are too high to risk anything. The skin is basically done, and in the next step I'm going to spray a super saturated red, so even a single pigment in the wrong spot will be seen from miles away. So, white ink, followed by Blood Angels Red. The cool thing is that you can repeat this step multiple times to obtain more and more luminosity and vibrancy with every new iteration. I close the progression with the light pass of fluorescent orange. I use the yellowish note on the other models, but here the kick of the fluorescent paint will give to the vampire something more. Fangs and claws are based with a simple coat of Akhelian green. And the armors with a mix of dark silver mixed with black and turquoise ink. This is not the metallic contrast paint I used on the skeletons. Here I don't have any interesting modulation of the underpainting to maintain, or shapes that can benefit from that behavior. So I use inks simply to add tones, while boosting the shine of the metallic paint with their finish. Still, the extreme fluidity and the high saturation of the mix make this layer super quick and easy to apply. Time for oil paints. The block on the left is for the skins, and the block on the right is mainly for the bases. The application in this paint job is similar to the one used on the zombies, but in the last video I used them to tone down, desaturate and fuse the colors, while here I use them for saturation and to visually separate the different sections. You can see from the strong, vibrant colors on the palette that the game here is totally different. And since I want them to have a more powerful impact on the surface, I add less thinner to make the mix stick better to the models while delivering more pigments per units of surface. On the zombies I painted random patches to create a natural, free-flowing chaos of tones, but here the application is very precise and the placement is clearly based on the work of the previous layers. Mimicking the blocks used for priming, I create a transition from blue to magenta, dark and light red. These colors are progressive in the color wheel, and they mix well into each other, creating new saturated shades. So you don't have to worry about muddy results. And you can use the brush to blend the edges of these blocks as you need. I use a bit of brown as neutral transitional tone in the central parts of the skin. I use green on the fur, and I don't want it to mix with red, because it's a complementary hue, but brown can easily bridge the two tones, blending with them in harmonious colors. I wait 15-20 minutes to give the thinner the time to evaporate, and I start cleaning. At this point, you know well how it works. I dampen the Q-tips with just a bit of white spirit, only working on the big guy, mainly to speed up the process on its large volumes. And I clean the other models with dry Q-tips, because I don't want to risk taking off too much from their small, smooth shapes. For the sake of chromatic coherency, to paint my definition, extreme highlights and textures, I use the exact same tones I use on the zombies. They will be great for all the peripheral parts, but I also add a light skin tone to be able to better connect the colors when moving to the central areas. Let's be brutally honest. These are already much more than battle-ready models, and I needed less than 2 hours to arrive to this point. I cannot consider this step optional, especially if you are working on a small warband, or an elite group like this one. But if you skip it while working on a bunch of troopers, well, I won't tell anyone. Jokes aside, even if I love to creep on details and I have all the time in the world to add more and more stuff, I feel that I don't have much to do on the smooth bodies of the little guys, but I have simply to enhance what is already there. A major part of the work is made by the ruins, that, because of their virtual material and strong geometric shapes, need a good amount of sharp definition. Usually I do very little on these parts, because I want the strong, eye-catching definition completely focused on the models. But in this case, the ruins have a finish and blending too similar to the characters, and the extra time invested in their textures and volumes makes them clearly different under every visual aspect. The work on the bodies is mainly on faces and extremities. It's a subtle detail, but working on the blue-magenta transition, I use light brushstrokes to simulate the movement of a fine layer of short fur. This sensation creates a nice contrast of consistencies with the sleek muscles of the upper parts. Oils naturally create a super smooth finish, but it's quite unrealistic to have that kind of smoothness everywhere. Breaking the uniformity with these elements, even if they are really subtle, you get extra definition, variety, and realism. Similar process on the actual sculpted fur, where I add just a bit of eye and extreme shine. I'm quite conservative on the central skin, but on the faces I add a ton of little lines and wrinkles to define better the expressions and take something away from their apparent humanity. The work on the Vargskir is 100% pure texturing, using only thick, undiluted paint. This guy is made of wrinkles and rough skin, so it's all about little lines and dots everywhere. At the beginning I thought this was going to be the most interesting part of the video, but because of the amazing behavior of oils and the fact that details are so many and so defined, detailing becomes just highlighting a bit what's already there. Don't get me wrong, this is a great thing for speed painting and a box game. That means also that the model has been sculpted with easy painting in mind, but I don't know, it was too easy. And high level of visual noise works well on this kind of feral models, so I use again brushstrokes and thick paint to add textures to every flat area. I close this step with a simple highlight on the metal parts, using thin broken lines to enhance the sharp angles, and add a ton of little scratches. "4 hours of work?" Only because I used 4 hours in all the recent videos. But taking off the compulsive detailing I did on the little vampires because I had the extra time and I was having a lot of fun, I could have stopped at the 3rd hour, still having something really cool to put on the table. As always, I expand a lot the explanation of every step, to let you know the reasons and the micro problem solving involved in the process. But at the end, what I've done is just priming, zenithal light, oil wash, and highlights. And I cannot wait to see how you use these ideas for your models. If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!